Hi there, my name is Peter Curran. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my action research project. I did my action research project on electronic device use in the classroom, and the reason I did that was because I found that electronic devices have the potential to offer students many advantages and enrich their learning experience at school. But what I witnessed through the two practicum placements that I've had is they've got the potential for disadvantages. They've got the potential to be a huge distraction in the class. Um, and as a result, when students are distracted, especially in a technology class where there's so much going on, it just can't be distracted that way because what happens is that just increases the potential for accidents. So um, that's one issue I have with them. The one being a safety issue, number two being social issues. Um, I feel that students might not be able to afford device, and as a result, that sort of excludes the student, or it ostracizes them on a certain level. So I don't. I really feel strongly that the school board or the school itself should supply the device, and that way the students all have their own devices and they're all the same. So, like I was mentioning, I found during my two practicum placements, students were really distracted with the devices, and it was a safety hazard for one, and it also made it really challenging from a teacher's perspective to hold the students' attention. And I just think that because there's such a push in education to embrace devices and integrate technology into the classroom, that we need to ask the question, do wireless devices present an advantage or a disadvantage in the classroom? When we're talking about wireless devices, we're talking about smartphones, iPads, iPhones, tablets, the smart watches. I think a lot of people, because so many people are in tune with these things, I don't have to go into detail about that. I think most people are pretty familiar with those. And when we're talking about student engagement, we're going to define that as the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, their optimism, and the passion that they show when they're being taught or learning. So yeah, I just wanted to go through my the annotated bibliography here. So some of the research articles that I found, I got to mention off the top that this link is actually will connect you with the Peel District School Board's ProQuest. It's like a bank of research articles, and I reached out to a family member who was able to log in for me and help me out with that, because this way I didn't have to pay for them. And so yeah, I don't know that you'd be able to necessarily reach those, get to those articles by that link, but if you Google the title of the article, you should be able to find it that way as well. But so I like this article, Curbing Digital Distractions in the Classroom. It sort of cuts to the chase. It sort of detailed a lot of the experiences that I found and I had in the classroom, and a lot of the numbers sound high on paper, but it's sort of normal from what I experienced. One of the statistics that they gave us were talking about an undergrad student in their class, and on average, apparently the students, according to the surveys they conducted, were using their phones more than 11 times per class for unrelated schoolwork. Um, so this article was interesting to me because it kind of looked at that perspective by analyzing the source of the distractions, and I thought that that might be helpful in providing insight into how we could look at uh, curbing distraction, uh, curbing device use, and as a result, decreasing the distraction in the class. Um, this one, hold the phone, high school students' perceptions of mobile phone integration in the classroom. I also thought this article was interesting because it looked at it from the student's perspective, not from the teacher's perspective. So obviously we're always looking at things from teachers' perspectives, from our sort of, if we're coming up with an issue or a problem in the class and we want to develop a way to come up with a solution. Obviously the action research process is what we kind of end up doing, whether we do the whole action research process or not. A lot of the components of the action research process we utilize when we're looking for solutions to problems. And I thought that this was interesting because it looked at it from not the teacher's perspective, it looked at it from the student's perspective, and I thought that that might provide us with some new perspective and insight because we're looking at it kind of from the flip side, you know. So I thought that it was also interesting that some of the students that were asked about this had serious concerns themselves about the potential disruption that mobile phones and devices could cause in the classroom, and I found that interesting. So yeah, it's. I'm not denying it. I don't think anyone can really deny or dispute that electronic devices do offer advantages and enrich the learning experience for students and teachers. You know, I mentioned some students with disabilities, and these apps that have been created, or even the things that are just already built into the phones, like speech to text or text to speech, having something read to you can be really helpful for some people with certain disabilities. Um, so these are just things that are sort of, I hate to say level the playing field, but just giving people that like just have everyday difficulties a way to sort of allow them to learn easier, or offer them a tool that makes it easier for them to learn. So why not? I mean, who's against that, right? Um, but you know, if we talk about sort of the history of devices quickly, and we think back to like when they were first sort of seen, we're probably talking about, you know, around the 1990s when we were seeing little personal calculators that were kind of programmable. Um, we saw flip phones, or the infancy of sort of cell phones come up in high schools at that time, and they weren't so much of an issue then, as far as there was there was at that point they weren't really, you know, an asset at all. They were just a distraction and an annoyance, I think, for a lot of teachers and administration. I mean, that was before they even had any sort of recording devices or cameras in them. So these things, you know, are just sort of happening. Technology is evolving faster than we can keep up with, and we can't sort of come up with solutions and rules before the technology is invented because obviously we're not familiar with it. So it's just one of those things that it's a reactionary process, and and that's, you know, probably the best way to put it. So as technology has increased, we're seeing that hey, we've got to embrace this. You know, it's the kind of thing that's not going away. And it's the kind of thing that can also enrich students' learning experiences as well. So why not embrace it? It just comes down to how we can do this responsibly, and how we can keep these devices as, you know, a positive, not a negative, right? So I think a lot of that comes down to classroom management techniques, to be honest with you. There are some ways of kind of preventing these from being a distraction. We could sort of um, there's ways of kind of cutting out the Wi-Fi in the room, or I mean, that sounds, you might laugh and think that's kind of extreme, but honestly, sort of short of like yanking the phones out of the students' hands, which obviously you can't do either, are there was just really difficult to get these students to stop putting their phones down and stop using them. So I don't know if that's what it has to come down to, you know, cutting the internet off in the school, or being able to sort of turn it off and on when needed, or if you just say, you know what, no phones at all, welcome in this class. If you need a device, we will supply it, and that way there's no question. You know, if you have your phone you know, in your pocket, you're breaking the rules, and you're going to have to sort of face the, you know, the consequences, or, you know, be asked to leave or put your phone in your locker or that sort of thing. So I just think we need to kind of take it a little bit more seriously and deal with it before it becomes a really big problem for us. You know, I always thought that students would be more inclined to Google something or look something up to answer a question that they asked me. A lot of times students would ask me questions, and you know, you obviously don't know everything, and you need to say, hey, why don't you check it out, look it up on your device. And I would say to them, you know, you've got your phone in your pocket, why don't you look it up, and tell you what, let me know what, you know, let me know what you find, because I don't know the answer to it, and I'm kind of curious. And from my experience, what I found, a lot of students would just sort of, that was almost the fastest way to ask them to get them to put their phone away. They would sort of, they'd have no interest in doing that. So I thought that was kind of odd. Um, Anyways, moving on, I'm talking about the data sources and how we're going to collect the data. And we're going to do that through teacher observations, just observations during the class. We're also going to, and that way we can sort of observe the process and see how it's taking place. Survey given at the beginning of the course and survey given at the end of the course for the students to complete. And these are anonymous surveys as well. I want to mention, and a survey given at the end of the course for the tech teachers as well in the same department. And that would also be an anonymous survey as well. And that's just to help keep data findings reliable. And potential participants who would provide the research would include, ideally, would be the students in your class and the other tech teachers that are right there in your school. In the interest of receiving accurate data, like I mentioned, we're going to keep the surveys anonymous by students and keep them anonymous by for the teachers as well. And the other thing is that I wanted to mention is by completing the surveys all at the same time, we minimize or sort of ensure, I guess I should say, that there's no knowledge of the questions ahead of time, and that's going to, lower the chance of having any sort of bias on there as well. So in closure here, I just want to say that device use in the classroom can enrich student experience. There's no denying that. It can provide more engagement than a textbook. Definitely more exciting to read with something that's interactive than something that's not. However, device use in the classroom definitely has the potential for negative ramifications as well. The responsible use of devices in the classroom needs to be closely monitored by the teacher, and I suppose that comes down to a classroom management issue more than anything. So the teacher needs to monitor the device use and ensure that they're providing and enriching the classroom experience and not taking away from that experience by creating distractions that might lead to safety concerns and, like I was saying before, increase the chance for accidents or bullying, social ostracization, that sort of thing, and leaving a student feeling inadequate due to the fact that they don't have the latest and greatest, iPhone, for example. They've got, something that does the job, but it's not as good in someone else's opinion or whatever. So we go to school to get away from that, right? So whenever we can, we want to limit students from feeling that way. And yeah, so utilization of that action research process will provide the necessary data to form the conclusion to the question, do wireless devices present an advantage or a disadvantage in the classroom? And I can say that as a teacher, I can see how the process of planning and putting the action research cycle into action and sort of utilizing that process is a useful tool. And I can see how that would be useful and definitely use that in the future. Thanks very much for your time.